Term limits on Maryland ballots for November. Now a local group brings more awareness to the movement. Next at 4, why they think this could help improve crime and education in the state. A controversy sparked by a potential new Johns Hopkins police force. New today, Fox 45 News looks at why students are pushing back against a strategy being used at other universities locally. Funding secure for Baltimore County teacher raises.
It's a small win, but it's a win in the right direction.
The questions that still remain for the future.
Live from WBFF in Baltimore, this is Fox 45 News at 4.
With 6 weeks until Election Day, a group is working to tell voters in Baltimore City that they have the chance to change how long elected leaders can serve. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mary Bubala.
And I'm Kai Jackson. Without term limits, elected leaders can serve until they're voted out of office or leave office. Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost is live outside of City Hall right now. Mackenzie, term limits will be on the ballot in November. Is that right?
In front of City Hall,
why am I part of it? Because I support this man, and I want term limits.
A group of local activists and leaders all calling on voters to make a change.
I believe that this is the time for OK for Question K.
On the ballot, you'll see a slew of questions, including Question K. It sets out to only limit city council members, the council president, the mayor, and comptroller to 2 four-year terms.
This is a modest concept that makes sense for Baltimore City.
And it would begin in 2024.
We need fresh new ideas. We need bold new ideas.
Giovanni Patterson, former GOP candidate for city council president, now the chairman of the People for Elected Accountability and Civic Engagement. That's the group backing the efforts.
We're watching our population decline, our murder rate continues to rise, and our public school students continue to fall further behind. We want to create a healthy local government where our elected leaders are not content to remain in office for many years and follow the same old status quo.
Similar plans have been tried before. Bills in the council in 2015 and 2018 failed. In this 2018 Baltimore Sun article, then City Councilman Brennan Scott is quoted saying, "I support the bill," though he did raise some financial concerns. But with Baltimore in the midst of a crime crisis that's gripped the city for almost a decade, and an education system with plummeting graduation rates and students slipping in class,
I have seen city government over the last 50 years. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Former independent mayoral candidate and business owner Bob Wallace says term limits could help leaders stay focused on creating change.
A commitment to solve problems. And I believe, Mackenzie, that 8 years is enough time to have an impact.
Several large cities like New York, Los Angeles, Houston, and Dallas all have some term limits in place. Baltimore ballot questions historically have seen success.
I think that this is a measure that I could see passing very easily.
And with the problems facing City Hall, political analyst John Dede says voters could see this as a chance to change Baltimore.
Based on the record of a lot of Baltimore City leaders over the last 20 years, and the way things have gone, people may look at term limits as this is the best solution.
The ballot proposal would not prevent someone from running for other offices if they get termed out. Now, I'm told there will be a public awareness campaign about Question K to try and get voters up to speed on what's going to be on their ballot. Those efforts are slated to begin in just a few weeks. Live outside City Hall, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
As Mackenzie mentioned, this is far from the first time term limits have been considered in Baltimore City. In 2018, Councilman Yitzi Schleifer introduced a bill to limit the number of consecutive terms politicians could serve. That bill didn't pass, and a similar one failed in 2020. Comptroller Bill Henry also tried to approve term limits while he was on the city council, but that bill also failed. And 9 out of the 10 largest cities in the U.S. have term limits in place for their mayor, city council members, or really both. In Washington, D.C., voters tried to put the question of term limits on the ballot, but that got overruled. Again, voters in Baltimore, they're going to get the chance to make a final decision this November.
And that brings us to our question of the day. Do you support term limits for Baltimore City elected leaders? So far, 100% of those who voted say yes. We'd like to hear from you. Make your voice heard by going to foxbaltimore.com/vote. We'll check back on the results throughout the evening. Now, we do need to disclose Sinclair's executive chairman, David Smith, financially supported the petition drive to get the issue of term limits on the ballot. Sinclair is the parent company of FOX45.
And just into our newsroom, Baltimore police have made an arrest in the killing of Morgan State security guard Julian Frew. Officers arrested 21-year-old Chase Wilson from Accokeek. Investigators say they have evidence Wilson shot Frew on August 31st after an argument on Marble Hall Road near Cold Spring Lane. Wilson is now charged with first-degree murder and faces life in prison if convicted. We're working to get more information in this story. Keith Daniels will have a live report coming up, all new at 5 o'clock tonight. And police have also made an arrest in the shootings of a 17-year-old boy and a 23-year-old man. Officers say Zamil Dixon faces first and second-degree murder charges. It happened on May 19th on Edmondson Avenue near Warwick Avenue.
Baltimore is once again on pace to see more than 300 people killed for the year. So far, there have been 254 people killed. That's down from one last year. However, significantly more people, 550, have been shot and survived this year. Now, at this point in 2020, that number was 519. Pushback and protest continues as Johns Hopkins University moves forward with plans to provide a private police force. Well, this despite dozens of other schools in the area already having their own police department in place. Well, tonight, Fox 45's Rebecca Pryor is diving deeper into this debate, and she's examining what's causing the controversy on campus. Rebecca?
Yeah, Kai, this isn't a new concept. For decades, colleges in this area and really across the country have had private police forces protecting students and staff. Now, to name a few that are here locally, Towson, Loyola, UMD, Coppin State, and Morgan State all have had on-campus police units for years. Still, there are a few things that stand out about Hopkins. According to political analyst John Deedy, one of the top concerns is its location in the center of the city.
People may feel that it's almost too much of a big brother presence as far as in the community, and the fact that, you know, it's around various neighborhoods, and that people may feel that there's too much of a police presence in general. There's a lot of very negative anti-police attitudes, as I mentioned, in the Baltimore area, and I think that I really think that's part of it.
Now, another issue some have, unlike most of the other colleges in the area, Hopkins is private. Some fear that means we'll only be held accountable to Hopkins, not the public or city police. However, the university has already put safeguards in place to prevent that from being an issue. Coming up tonight at 5, I'll have more on Hopkins' Memorandum of Understanding and why some say that it should be enough to ease concerns on campus. Again, more on that coming up tonight at 5. But for now, reporting live in Baltimore, Rebecca Pryor, Fox 45 News.
Rebecca, thank you. Well, a step forward for public school teachers and staff in Baltimore County. A deal has been reached to give thousands of district employees raises this year. But questions remain about some details of this plan and how exactly raises will be funded moving forward. Fox 45's Amy Simpson joins us live. Amy, what can you tell us about the plan for teacher raises? I know they are anxious to get them.
Yeah, definitely some anxious teachers and school staff out there. We know the county executive and BCPS leadership have clashed on these negotiations over the last few weeks, not about whether or not these staff members deserve these raises, but where exactly the funding would come from. And today they did announce an agreement. The compensation plan that they announced today includes a 3% cost of living increase, retroactive back to July 1st, a mid-year step increase for all employees, retroactive to the start of the fiscal year, retention bonuses for all staff, and additional bonuses for employees with more than 30 years of service. BCPS Superintendent Dr. Darrell Williams today says this one-year compensation plan is worth about $76 million, some of it coming from existing budget surplus money, some of it American Rescue Plan education money, and the rest redirected money already in the district budget.
These are wins. It's a small win, but it's a win in the right direction, and we still have more work to do.
And Amy, how is the teachers union responding to today's news?
Yeah, well, they were much more blunt with their response today, as the original plan on the negotiating table was for 5 years worth of negotiated pay raises for teachers and staff. Take a listen.
Now, this is not what we had originally asked for. We all know that. But through the advocacy of our members, we have more than doubled the initial offer that was on the table.
And while this compensation package announced today is a step in the right direction for educators right now, they said that there would be retention bonuses for all teachers and staff, but they did not say when those bonuses will come or how much they'll be for. Those details were not shared. They said they would come shortly. It's also unknown right now how these teacher raises will be funded beyond this year. If you remember, County Executive Johnny Olszewski has been adamant that he will not support a tax increase to pay for these raises. Reporting live, Amy Simpson, Fox 45 News.
The man accused of killing a Baltimore father in D.C. is still on the run, while law enforcement believes they are closing in.
Congress needs to pass a funding measure to keep the federal government operating, why one provision in the bill is causing major headaches for both sides of the aisle.
Investors on Wall Street preparing for the worst, while everyday Americans hope for the best. I'm Atrell Nashar with the Fed's latest comments and a surprising turn for the housing market.
And Ian, a major hurricane now tracking over the eastern Gulf, eventually making landfall in places south of Tampa down towards Sarasota, and could have impacts around here into this weekend. I'm going to plan it out hour by hour and let you know you could see some rain and wind in Maryland. My Weather Authority forecast.
Fox 45 News, winner of 17 2022 Regional Emmy Awards, more than all other Baltimore news stations combined.
Tuesday, a mixed day for Wall Street after the Dow entered a bear market this week.
Rising interest rates and stubborn inflation making it hard to predict which way the economy is headed and if the U.S. can avoid a recession. Some positive news, though. We like to hear that as national correspondent Audra El-Nashar explains consumers continue to show resilience.
What's been a prime example of pandemic supply chain headaches, the housing market unexpectedly showing signs of leveling out. New home sales jumped nearly 29% between August and July after 2 straight months of decline, according to government data out Tuesday. While the median price of a new home fell $2,600.
Crazy time to be buying a home.
First-time buyers like Hayden Simon and his partner hope the market cools down after many were locked out because of tight supply and soaring prices.
Interest rates are going up, so what we're hoping is that some of the prices either start to fall or at least it leads to maybe, less multiple offer situation.
The Federal Reserve aggressively raising interest rates, a move some critics say came too late. Chicago Fed President Charles Evans acknowledging their policy moves now don't have a guaranteed outcome.
Are there risks? Yes, of course there are risks because we're having to increase rates much higher than they've been increased in quite some time.
Markets around the world taking a hit as other central banks raise rates too. On Wall Street, the Dow's plunge this week means all 3 major indices are now in a bear market.
We're at a moment where in many different markets, investors are trying to figure out exactly where things are going.
According to a Gallup survey from this spring, 58% of Americans say they have money invested in the stock market, either in mutual funds, retirement accounts, or individual stocks. A Bank of America analyst note obtained by Fox Business shows their chief investment strategist sees the S&P falling to somewhere between 3,300 and 3,500 points, as much as a 10% drop off Tuesday's open. Despite the turbulence on Wall Street, how consumers feel about economic conditions is improving, according to new readings from both the Conference Board and the University of Michigan. But both reports show less optimism when it comes to short-term outlooks about wages and prices. In Washington, I'm Audra El-Nashar.
In some areas, there will be catastrophic flooding and life-threatening storm surge. And so if you're on Florida's Gulf Coast, from Naples all the way through the Tampa Bay area and some of the counties north of that, that could be something that happens. And it will certainly happen in some parts of Florida's Gulf Coast.
Well, roughly 2.5 million people in Florida are currently under some form of an evacuation order as Hurricane Ian makes landfall in Cuba and barrels toward Florida.
That's right. On the left, that's a line of cars waiting for sandbags. Look at that. To try and protect their property, local officials warn of interruptions of power, fuel, maybe even communications. After Ian makes landfall in the south, it's expected to head north towards our area.
Let's check in with Chief Meteorologist Jonathan Myers for the latest on this storm's path and track.
Yeah, mind you, it will have been over land for a few days by the time anything gets here, so it'll be remnants, but still some rain, some wind, potentially over the weekend for us. But right now, a devastating storm rolling over western Cuba earlier this morning for an initial landfall and now heading straight towards the Gulf Coast of Florida. Take a look. By later on Wednesday night into early Thursday, south of Tampa, right around Sarasota, Bradenton, could have a Category 3 125-mile-an-hour hurricane making landfall here as we head towards sunset and beyond. And then this is going to continue to move north, likely just inland, so it will weaken, eventually becoming a tropical depression and a remnant low as some of the rain and wind actually begins to head toward us. Eventually, this is going to get shifted east and away by early next week. But for now, winds up to 120 miles an hour. This is moving north over the open Gulf of Mexico at about 10 miles an hour. And you see here by, say, early Friday, already the computer models beginning to cross the peninsula of Florida. And then we watch exactly where it's going to go. It does not look like there's incredibly favorable conditions, even if the center did go over the Atlantic for a time once again, as it made it to the east coast of Florida, perhaps, and then northbound. But the big intensification time would be probably now to Wednesday morning. Then by Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening, may actually be on a slight weakening trend as it makes that landfall, goes from a Category 4 to a Category 3. And then it begins at certainly marked transformation into a weaker system and eventually extratropical system by the time any impacts get here. So in terms of the storm surge potential down in Florida, this was a big concern. Now it looks like that surge up to and above 9 feet, which would just be devastating and life-threatening, should be south of Tampa Bay, but still at least 4 to 7 feet of surge. Tampa Bay area, Sarasota southbound looks like the worst of it, and then some huge rain amounts. Look at this, 27, 33 inches of rain. That could be the big story around Tampa. 3 feet of rain. This could be, think about Houston, Harvey, that time. Yeah, it could be the same type of situation. Extensive flooding, perhaps. And by the time we hit this weekend, could see an inch or two of rain around here. Then, of course, a Category 3 type winds, at least 110 miles an hour, maybe 115. Could be right around Sarasota and Tampa. And eventually, computer models do bring some wind. I think this is a little overdone, but notice the blues and the greens. That's maybe 20 to 40 miles an hour, say later Sunday on into early Monday. So Saturday, primarily dry, although later in the day, there does come some rain. On and off rain on Sunday. That's what our GFS future scan, our American computer model, says around here, and lasts into early Monday as kind of a wind-driven rain. So I think later Sunday into early Monday, kind of that wind-driven rain situation. And the heaviest of the rain begins moving out Monday late into Tuesday. And then, of course, there's also, it's still the peak of hurricane season, a 60% chance of tropical development way down in the tropics over the central Atlantic. Right now, 71 degrees here in Baltimore, mostly cloudy skies, winds out of the west-southwest at about 15. Of course, we are tracking our hurricane that's down in the Gulf now. That's really the big weather maker. Sunshine, dry weather the next 3 days, and then we have to watch again Sunday into Monday.
Jonathan, thank you. Our Megan Gillen is in Tampa, Florida right now. She's hit the ground running, tweeting out some reports as many prepare for Ian to hit. She found a gas station that was already out of gas. Stay tuned for Megan's live reports as the storm barrels into Florida starting tomorrow on Fox 45 Morning News. There's the Sunoco in Tampa Bay out of gas. With the cost of student loan forgiveness, how much experts say it will add up for taxpayers over the next several decades. But first, students in Virginia walk out of class to protest new gender identity rules, what they're demanding. Well, more than 100 schools take part in a walkout today in response to Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin's new proposed school policy that affects transgender and non-binary students. Joy Wang from our Sinclair sister station in D.C. reports on the walkout stemming from a grassroots movement started by students themselves.
The Pride Liberation Project started right here in Fairfax County. Students hoping to bring attention to issues that are concerning for the LGBTQIA community, not just for Fairfax County, but all across Virginia. Again, they're the ones who have been organizing all of these walkouts, impacting almost 100 schools across Virginia. Many of the students telling me that they're concerned not just about student safety, but also other students and teachers and their mental health.
We're really doing this to show not just, the Board of Education that, we don't want this, but also that these students are supported. Like, they do have a community behind them and they're not alone, no matter where they are in Virginia.
Students I spoke with also brought up concerns there's a mental health crisis in the queer community and their peers could be taken out of counseling. Right now, many school districts allow students to choose which pronouns they use, which bathrooms and locker rooms they use, and which sports they play based on gender identity without their parents' permission. The proposed policy Governor Youngkin campaigned on will change that. Casey Calabia is a senior at McLean High School and identifies as queer and non-binary. She says the change takes away a student's right to privacy and would treat students like their parents' property instead of their own independent people.
I am so fortunate and so grateful that my parents have been understanding and have taken the time to listen to me and understand what it means for me to be queer. But not every single student has that, whether it's parents who just outright don't understand. They don't necessarily reject the student, but they don't understand. To those who are actively abusive to their queer kids. Every single kind of that family exists in Virginia.
Many students walking out today also saying that they're hoping their districts will actually stand with them.
Well, we're also hearing from Governor Youngkin about the controversial policy amid today's walkout.
You either think that parents should be engaged in this decision, which is what I firmly believe it's what Virginia voters expressed loudly last year, or you think that parents should be excluded from this decision. I think that all schools must comply because that's the law.
The new policies are expected to take effect on October 27th. A young Baltimore father gunned down while installing solar panels in D.C. Why law enforcement believes they're closer to catching the shooter. And the Fed is considering raising interest rates again. Why financial leaders say this is needed despite the pain it could cause. And just 2 years after rolling out the multi-billion-dollar Kerwin plan, we're already seeing setbacks. Project Baltimore looks into whether it's already outdated.
Happening right now, a manhunt in Washington, D.C. is underway for a fugitive featured on Maryland's Most Wanted in the shooting death of a Baltimore father. Let's go right to Alexa Ashwell, who's live with the latest on the search for the suspect. Alexa.
Okay, this is a very dangerous situation. According to police in D.C., this man, take a look, Avery Miller, fired at officers when they approached him, then ran off. This triggering what's become an hours-long search for him. Take a look. This was the scene in the Capitol View neighborhood throughout the day. Officers set up a perimeter that spanned several blocks. According to police, officers were called here after a woman recognized Miller and alerted authorities to his location. The department detailing Miller fired several rounds at officers when they made contact with him. Now, no one was hurt, but Miller ran off and has yet to be located. Take a listen.
It's unknown if he's still armed. He was armed at the time he encountered our officers. We know that he is affiliated with this neighborhood, but it's not clear why he was over here.
Now, police say surveillance video and witness statements ultimately led them to identifying Miller as the suspect in this case. But Kai Mary, investigators have yet to pinpoint an exact motive in this killing.
Authorities know anything else about Miller? For instance, does he have a criminal history that we're aware of?
Yes, Kai. In fact, online records show that Miller had a warrant out for his arrest at the time of this murder. We'll have more on that, plus the latest on the search for him coming up at 5. Back to you.
In our Vote 2022 coverage, a major change is coming to counting ballots this general election. A Maryland judge has ruled mail-in ballots can be canvassed before Election Day. Right now, that process can begin October 1st. But today, Republican candidate for governor Dan Cox says he's going to fight the judge's ruling. Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost joins us live with the latest efforts on Cox's behalf. Mackenzie?
Yeah, Mary, so we know that the attorneys for Dan Cox say they will appeal this ruling, and it comes after last week when a judge in Montgomery County said that the State Board of Elections, their motion to count and canvass these mail-in ballots early, they said that could happen because of the influx in mail-in ballots that we started to see years ago, and we did see that during the primary election this last summer. Now, Dan Cox says that the Board of Elections need to follow the law, and right now the law in Maryland says that those mail-in ballots cannot be counted until 2 days after the election. But according to this ruling from the judge, that process can begin October 1st. We're now seeing Dan Cox's attorneys say they're going to fight this in court. We spoke with a political analyst, John Deedy, earlier today, and he says this is very similar to what the rhetoric we've been hearing from Dan Cox throughout this entire campaign. Cox has been one to say that the rule of law needs to be followed and that this current appeal process plays right into the playbook that what we saw earlier from former President Donald Trump as well.
By counting the ballots immediately, you close off the conspiracy theories election night. It makes it more difficult for him. He may not accept his loss. I doubt he will concede graciously, but it just closes another door on him. Now, he needs to move on from this and start figuring out how he's going to bring in other voters. But the problem is all of his actions show the complete opposite.
Democrats were quick to take their criticisms on this latest move. We got a statement from Democrat candidate for governor Wes Moore and his campaign. The statement says that this latest appeal is an attempted assault on the election process. Let me read you another part of this statement. They say, quote, "This kind of behavior is an attack on democracy and should not be allowed anywhere near the governor's office. We've said it before, Dan Cox just is not into democracy." Now, within the last 10 minutes or so, we did just get word that the Maryland Court of Special Appeals issued an order asking both sides, so that's Dan Cox and the State Board of Elections, to file their briefs on this issue, given the time sensitivity we have with October 1st right around the corner. Live in Baltimore, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
It is a multi-billion-dollar plan to improve public education in Maryland, but just 2 years after rolling out Kerwin, the state is seeing setbacks.
That's right. As Project Baltimore's Chris Papps explains, the man behind this massive funding increase is asking for patience. Britt Kerwin says Maryland is on track to have America's best schools in less than 10 years.
There being 95 votes in the affirmative.
February
2021.
The veto is overridden.
Maryland's legislature overrides Governor Larry Hogan's veto and passes the largest education spending increase in Maryland's history. $30 billion additional tax dollars over the first 10 years. $4 billion additional tax dollars every year after that. It was called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, also known as the Kirwan Plan.
First of all, the blueprint is very rigorously drawn from the elements of the highest performing school systems in the world.
Britt Kirwan spent 4 years leading the commission that drafted the plan.
We took those strategies, put them into the Maryland context, and that's how we built the blueprint.
All of a sudden, everybody knows a lot of people that are infected.
In early 2021, the world was suffering through the COVID pandemic. Many state politicians, including Comptroller Peter Franchot, called on the legislature to delay voting on the blueprint until we emerge from the pandemic. But the legislature passed it anyway.
Did COVID, in a way, sort of render the blueprint outdated?
No, absolutely not. COVID is short-term, had very significant impact, but COVID is short-term. The blueprint is forever.
But the effects of COVID are not short-term. So distance learning, for example, distance learning is never going to go away.
Right.
Many critics of the Kirwan Plan point out it doesn't address distance learning. Maryland is also facing major bus driver and teacher shortages. Schools in the Baltimore region reported hundreds of openings leading up to the start of school. Many blame the Great Resignation due to COVID. But as the nation faces a teacher shortage, the blueprint added teachers, attracting them with higher pay. So far, it hasn't seemed to work. But Kirwan says in a few years, it will.
I think what we've done in Maryland is to create a model for teachers with this career ladder and substantial increases in pay, more autonomy in the classroom, is going to make teaching in Maryland not only an attractive career position for Marylanders, but for attracting people from across the country.
The blueprint also created incentives for teachers to achieve higher levels of professional certification. But that, too, hasn't gone as planned. Over the summer, facing pressure from school systems, the Maryland State Department of Education lowered the requirements of some teacher certifications to get more teachers in the classroom. But Kirwan says this, too, is only temporary.
It would be silly for me to predict exactly what date it would be totally back to normal, but I think over the next 2 or 3 years, things will seem very much a place where we'd like them to be.
The Kirwan Plan was not the first time Maryland overhauled public education. 20 years ago, the legislature passed what was called the Bridge to Excellence Act, or the Thornton Plan, which at the time was the largest education spending increase in the state's history. But the results were questionable. In 2002, when Thornton passed, Maryland's high school graduation rate was 3 points above the national average. By 2019, Maryland's graduation rate had gone up, but the national average went up more. Maryland's graduation rate and the national average are now the same. Kirwan says Thornton succeeded by increasing funding, but failed in creating a structure for how the money was used. The blueprint, he says, is different. It lays out strict guidelines and expectations for how the additional funding can be spent. He also says there's accountability.
As the money is allocated, there's an accountability board that is going to measure progress towards meeting these expectations. And the AIB, the Accountability Board, has the authority to withhold funds when jurisdictions are not meeting the expectations.
What Thornton also didn't have was a definition for success. For Kirwan, it's clear. In 9 more years, after $30 billion additional education dollars are spent, despite the effects of COVID. Kerwin says success will be if 80% of Maryland students are considered career and college ready by the end of 10th grade. And that is a lofty goal. Right now, he says that percentage sits around 40%.
That would be success. That would be remarkable. It would put us way ahead of every state in the U.S., and it would put us on a par with the best performing school systems in the world.
I'm Chris Pabst, and this is Project Baltimore.
As Kerwin explained, the blueprint for Maryland's future is implemented over 10 years, costing billions of dollars. Project Baltimore will be watching to see how those tax dollars are spent and if they make a difference for students.
Making headlines right now, let's take a live look at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. Democrats unveil their plan to finance the federal government through December 16th. Now, the stopgap spending measure, as it's called, includes more than $12 billion of support for Ukraine, billions in disaster assistance, and Senator Joe Manchin's bill to streamline the permitting process for energy projects. Now, Democratic leaders promised to hold a vote on Manchin's bill as long as the West Virginia senator supported the Inflation Reduction Act.
I would hope that, if 47 of my Republican friends have signed on to a bill extremely similar to this, and knowing how important energy security and energy independence is for our country to remain a superpower and also have control of our own destiny, you would think that maybe 15 or 20 out of the 47 would look at this and say it's a time in It's a moment of time. It's basically a time in history. We have never had an opportunity to do this.
Well, both chambers must approve the measure by the end of Friday to prevent a partial government shutdown.
Also making headlines, Federal Reserve officials say they are trying to tweak the economy, boosting the interest rate to get inflation down and employment levels up. But even with economic uncertainties like Russia's invasion of Ukraine and global supply chain issues, the Fed's short-term rate will probably have to stay higher for longer than experts planned. The Fed says it's trying to balance its goal of bringing down inflation while avoiding a recession.
A big announcement today about recognizing and preserving contributions Black Americans have made to American history. Congressman Kweisi Mfume and Senator Ben Cardin announced the formation of the National Council on African American History and Culture Act of 2022. The council will advise the National Endowment for the Humanities about showcasing the work of Black creators and help ensure that work is taught in schools. Mfume says the council will ensure African American history is fully integrated into the telling of American history. Well, Baltimore residents may soon decide whether to impose term limits on elected leaders. What each side of the debate has to say.
Political fallout coming from a new report showing the true cost of student loan forgiveness, how many hundreds of billions of dollars this will cost taxpayers over the next decade.
And Ian rapidly strengthening a Category 3 already, becoming a Category 4 and potentially moving onto the Florida Gulf Coast just south of Tampa. And then look, could get some impacts around here as remnants this weekend. We're going to plan it all out coming up by Weather Authority forecast.
The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan will cost more than $400 billion over the next decade. That's billions more than the White House's initial estimate. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins has the story.
When President Biden announced his plan to forgive $10,000 in student loans for those making less than $125,000, the first question asked was, how much will this cost taxpayers?
That totals about $24 billion a year on average over the next 10 years.
Turns out $240 billion is a bit off, according to a new analysis from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. They say it will ultimately cost $400 billion, 67% higher than the White House's original estimate.
We already had a plan to repay student debt. It's called a job. President Biden is inflation's best friend.
The $400 billion figure is about what was spent on COVID relief checks in last year's American Rescue Plan, which some economists are partly blaming for fueling higher inflation. Loan forgiveness critics worry Biden's latest plan will make matters worse.
It's very important, particularly when inflation is as high as it currently is, that the federal government is at least nudging in the right direction. That means making deficits smaller. This bill makes deficits larger.
The White House says the president sees this as an opportunity to give Americans a little bit of breathing room.
Opponents of the Biden-Harris administration student loan plan are trying to stop it because they know it will provide much needed, again, relief for working families.
The Biden administration is telling those eligible they will be able to apply for loan forgiveness early next month. But the plan Tuesday facing the first of likely multiple legal challenges, potentially holding things up until the Supreme Court has a final say on the matter. I'm Kayla Gaskins reporting.
We're tracking Hurricane Ian right now. The storm is causing major disruptions for residents, businesses, and even NASA. On the left, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are moving their operations to the Miami area, which is south, if you can believe that, to avoid the potential impact of Hurricane Ian. The NFL teams and local officials say they'll watch and see if they need to make changes to the team's home game against the Chiefs on Sunday. And on the right, NASA calls off its third attempt to launch the Artemis 1 rocket and is rolling it back inside in advance of the storm. Now, this latest delay means NASA can't try another launch for at least 3 weeks. Tampa's International Airport plans to suspend operations in about 15 minutes.
With the storm and the intensity of the winds, we will close today at 5 p.m. That's 5 p.m. today. No more commercial flights.
Once the clock strikes 5, airport officials will have time to secure jet bridges and ground equipment, as well as any leftover aircraft ahead of the storm. Its main terminal and parking garages will be closed to all visitors. Airport officials say the main concern is storm surge and also flooding.
And yeah, Kai, some of the surges in Tampa, maybe not as bad as they could have been with the initial tracks we were looking at, but at least 4 to 7 feet of water above ground level around that Tampa Bay area. As this is now a Category 3, and Ian looks like it may strengthen perhaps as it makes that move north and northeastbound. Could become briefly a Category 4 overnight tonight into early tomorrow before encountering either A, the coastline, or B, some a little more hostile conditions as it makes that final approach and landfall later on tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, especially, I think, south of Tampa around Bradenton, Florida, Sarasota, Florida. Could be some devastating impacts there, and then makes a jog northbound and eventually turns into a remnant low, and that's when we could get some impacts later this weekend, early next week. Notice all the computer models clustering just south of Tampa. Yesterday, it was over or north and northwest of Tampa. That was kind of the doomsday scenario with storm surges over 9 feet, perhaps, around Tampa. Now with this more southerly scenario, that's somewhat less surge for Tampa. So I guess that's good news. But areas near Fort Myers now under the gun. Now take a look at this kind of bee's nest, if you will, or this, say, bird's nest of all these model tracks. A little bit of a stall here near Charlotte, North Carolina, and eventually as remnants get swept east. And that's when we could see some of our rain later in the weekend. So for now, it looks like some pretty good strengthening happening over the next 24 to 36 hours. Very warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. And then it makes landfall, heads north, and weakens. So the main impacts here, at least initially, that big storm surge threat right around that Sarasota area and points immediately south could have over 9 feet of water above ground level. So that could lead to some major coastal flooding here, maybe some devastating and life-threatening storm surges coming in. And then the rain, boy, we could see anywhere up to, take a look at our computer model, 29 to 33 inches. That's like 3 feet of rain as this makes landfall and gradually moves its way inland into central Florida. Then eventually here, it probably takes till about Sunday, Monday for us to get our rain, especially south. That's where you see the most of it. But it could be up to an inch or two of rain, perhaps. And on top of that, now notice the strong winds getting up to about Tampa with the Category 3 strength gusts there. But we could see some winds of our own. Nothing like that. But it looks like, again, some of these greens and blues, that could be 20, 30-mile-an-hour winds locally around here. And then that rain could be pushing our way, especially Sunday on into Monday. Look at some of those showers, and that's when it gets gusty and windy around here. I think later Sunday into Monday. Going to have to watch the Ravens game, too, for inclement weather. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, dry days, but again, Sunday, Monday, tapering off on Tuesday. That's our impacts from Ian.
All right, Jonathan, thank you. Coming up on Fox 45 News at 5 o'clock, forcing change may be good for the city, according to some proponents. A closer look at a ballot proposal creating term limits for Baltimore officials. And stop scrolling TikTok right now, some people say, and make sure you're not sharing your personal information. The steps you need to follow to keep your private information safe. You may be unknowingly sharing some of your personal information. Consumer Reports tells us today, reveals that the TikTok privacy settings that you should adjust right now.
Whether you're new to TikTok or you've been watching videos for years, Consumer Reports says it might be time to think about adjusting the app's default privacy settings. Start with who can see your profile.
So setting your whole TikTok account to private is a great way to get a little bit more control over who can see the stuff on your profile.
While TikTok is a social media company, it makes its money through advertising, just like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Something that's really valuable for tech companies is building out a huge network of everyone that you know, your friends, your family, your coworkers, and they present it as a way for you to find your acquaintances on TikTok, which can be great, but it also gives the tech companies a lot of information about you, and you might not want to do that.
To make sure the app doesn't have access to your contacts or Facebook friends, toggle those settings off. And just above that setting, you can tell TikTok not to suggest your account to your contacts, Facebook friends, and others. That is, if you're not interested in having followers on the platform. TikTok and other companies use more than just your information about your friends and family for their targeted ad campaigns.
So you might not realize it, but TikTok has code spread all over the internet on websites and apps to collect data about things you do when you're not on TikTok. Now, there's nothing you can do to stop that entirely, but you can use a setting to control whether TikTok can use that data for targeted ads, and that's a good idea to protect your privacy.
And to protect yourself from hackers, not only on TikTok, but on other apps as well, Consumer Reports says one of the most important things you can do is set up multi-factor authentication.
That's that thing where they send you a code, right, through a text or an email. So you need not only your password, but also access to your phone or your email account to get in.
It's that extra layer of security that does a lot to keep the bad guys out. Consumer Report says that although these settings will help, you can never expect total privacy when using social media. Patrice Sanders, Fox 45 News.
Coming up on Fox 45 News at 5 o'clock, the pushback against the Johns Hopkins police force, looking into the proposal and why it's creating controversy. Also, Baltimore County school employees may be getting a raise, but where's the money coming from? We break down a new deal for increasing teacher pay. Good evening, I'm Kai Jackson.
I'm Mary Bubala. Tonight on Fox 45 News at 5. On the ballot this year, term limits for Baltimore officials, how it could change the way the city is run.
A killing caught on camera. What court documents reveal about a murder case just off Morgan State University's campus.
And Baltimore County teachers may be getting a pay raise, but it's unclear where that money is coming from. What we know about the plan tonight.
Live from WBFF in Baltimore, this is Fox 45 News at 5.
With 6 weeks until Election Day, a group is working to tell voters in Baltimore City they have a chance to change how long elected leaders can serve. Without term limits, elected leaders can serve until they're voted out or leave office.
That's right. Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost live outside City Hall tonight. Mackenzie, with term limits on the ballot in November, tell us more about the choice voters will be able to make.
Yeah, Mary Kai, it's going to be on the ballot and it will appear to voters as Question K. And this ballot proposal seeks to change Baltimore City's charter and cap elected leaders to 2 4-year terms. Now, the language only applies to city council members, the city council president, the mayor, and the city comptroller. Now, the people behind this include Giovanni Patterson. He was the one who ran as a Republican for city council president in 2020. He says implementing term limits would allow new faces, new ideas, and new people into city government to hopefully, what he says, turn Baltimore around. He cited crime concerns with education, and he says that's exactly why some leaders need to face term limits. Now, critics of this plan argue that voters ultimately already have that power. They can vote people out if they don't believe their elected leaders are doing a good enough job. In return to that, Patterson says other offices already have term limits in place, and he says Baltimore City needs it as well.
Is that insulting to the voters of the United States? Going to be a politician, you should have the best interests of your community at heart. And how can you do that if you're just constantly a politician?
Well, Mackenzie, the city council has tried to do this in the past. Is that right?
Yep. That's right, Kai. In 2015 and in 2018, both times there were bills introduced by members of the city council. Both times the bills failed to get out of committee. In 2018, then Councilman Brandon Scott was on record saying that he did support the term limit bill, although he did raise some concerns about the financial aspect of it. Earlier today, we spoke with political analyst John Deedy. He again cites some of the concerns facing Baltimore City and Baltimore voters as a reason why he thinks this plan could be successful.
I think that based on the record of a lot of Baltimore City leaders over the last 20 years and the way things have gone, people may look at term limits as this is the best solution. It may force leaders to say, okay, I only have so much time in office to do certain things and get things done.
Now, this proposal would not prohibit people from serving their 2 terms in one office and then running for election in a different office. And if voters do approve this proposal on the ballot, Question K, it would take effect for the 2024 elections. Live outside City Hall, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
And Mackenzie, as you just mentioned, this is far from the first time term limits have been considered in Baltimore City. In 2018, Councilman Yitzi Schleifer introduced a bill to limit the number of consecutive terms politicians can serve. But the bill, it didn't pass, and a similar one then failed in 2020. Comptroller Bill Henry also tried to approve term limits while he was on the city council. His bill also failed. And when you look around the country, Baltimore is a bit of an outlier. 9 of the 10 largest cities in the U.S. have term limits in place for their mayor, city council members, or both. In Washington, D.C., voters tried to put the question of term limits on the ballot in 2020, but that got overruled. But here in Baltimore, voters will now have a chance to make a final decision this November.
Now we need to disclose Sinclair's executive chairman, David Smith, financially supported the petition drive to get the issue of term limits on the ballot. Sinclair is the parent company of Fox 45. That brings us to our question of the day. Do you support term limits for Baltimore City elected leaders? So far, 100% of you who voted say yes. You can make your voice heard by going to foxbaltimore.com/vote.
Well, developing now, Baltimore police have arrested and charged a man in the shooting death of a 19-year-old Morgan State University security guard. And tonight, police say the suspect is a Morgan student. Keith Daniels is live with more on what we're learning.
Well, Mary, police arrested 21-year-old Chase Wilson yesterday, and tonight he faces several charges, including first-degree murder. Now, police say Wilson, seen here, shot Julian Frew after an argument August 31st. It happened at the Marble Hall Garden Apartments, which houses some Morgan State students. Frew was a contracted security guard with Allied working for the university. He was on duty when he was shot. Now, according to charging documents, the murder was caught on camera. The video shows what appears to be Wilson approaching Frew after a cell phone conversation. The suspect says something to Frew, shoots him, and runs away. Now, charging documents also revealed sandwich bags full of suspected marijuana were found in Frew's backpack, as well as packaging material and digital scales. Now, we reached out to the university for comment on the latest in this case. So far, we have not heard back. Meantime, Wilson faces life in prison if convicted. We're live tonight. Keith Daniels, Fox 45 News.
Protesters disrupt a public forum on at the Johns Hopkins Police University campus on a plan to have a police force in place. Now, tonight, those demands that Johns Hopkins abandon its plan for a private police force continue, despite dozens of other schools in the area that already have their own police forces. Fox 45's Rebecca Pryor is diving deeper right now into the debate and what's causing the controversy tonight. Rebecca?
Yeah, Kai, this isn't a new concept. For decades, colleges in the area and really across the country have had these private police forces in place in order to protect students and staff. Still, there are a few things that stand out about Hopkins. As Johns Hopkins University inches closer to implementing a private police force, outrage and opposition reaching new heights. But the backlash comes despite dozens of other Baltimore colleges already having their own police units in place, a point Mayor Brandon Scott recently made when pressed on the issue.
When you think about universities around the city, including Coppin and Morgan, they have police forces. We know that University of Baltimore has a police force, UMD. Most colleges do have that.
To name a few in the area, Towson, Loyola, UMD, Coppin State, and Morgan State all have had on-campus police for years. So what makes Hopkins any different?
In Baltimore, there has been a recent rich history of people not liking the police. So this is just another layer of law enforcement that has people uncomfortable.
According to political analyst John Deedy, a lot of the controversy also comes down to Hopkins being located in the heart of Baltimore.
People may feel that it's almost too much of a big brother presence as far as in the community, and the fact that, it's around various neighborhoods.
Another fear, unlike most universities in the area, Hopkins is private, making it accountable to Hopkins, not the public or police. However,
Johns Hopkins University has specific statutory authority and has already agreed to a number of, what we would call reform measures.
As former Deputy Commissioner Jason Johnson points out, Hopkins is attempting to ease those concerns with this, a memorandum of understanding, in which the university is agreeing to a number of measures, such as complying with the city's consent decree, wearing body cameras, and only taking on minor crimes such as theft. Major crimes, including murder, rape, and assault, will still fall under BPD's jurisdiction.
What Hopkins is trying to do is soothe people by basically saying, look, it's not going to be what you think it is.
It should really make everyone comfortable who has a legitimate concern about the accountability piece.
Both Johnson and Deedy adding, as crime climbs and BPD's police force dwindles, now more than ever, added protection for students and staff should be a top priority.
Hopkins, they're doing this because they see things in Baltimore out of control.
Having a specific police force specific to address the concerns of Hopkins stakeholders is really a move in the right direction.
And for those who still have concerns, Hopkins will be holding 2 additional town halls this week. One will take place on Thursday, the other on Friday. For more details about where and when, you can find those in this story on our website at foxbaltimore.com. Reporting live in Baltimore, Rebecca Pryor, Fox 45 News.
Well, a deal has been reached to give thousands of Baltimore County school employees raises this year.
But questions remain right now, however, about some of the details of the plan and how exactly raises will be funded going forward. Fox 45's Amy Simpson joins us live right now. And Amy, can you tell us about this plan for teacher raises?
Yes, so we know the county executive and school district leadership have clashed on these negotiations in recent weeks. It's not about whether or not they feel teachers and staff deserve these raises, but instead about where the money should come from. In a rare occasion today, Baltimore County government and school leadership all standing shoulder to shoulder, announcing plans to raise pay for thousands of teachers and staff across Baltimore County public schools.
Working together, we have reached an agreement on a substantial compensation package for BCPS employees for the 2022-2023 school year.
The agreement includes a 3% cost of living increase, retroactive to July 1st, a mid-year step increase for all employees, retroactive to the start of the fiscal year, retention bonuses for all staff, and additional bonuses for employees with more than 30 years of service.
Give our staff the compensation they truly deserve, and we would love to give more.
A competitive compensation package for BCPS employees.
While the teachers union is more blunt, as the original plan on the table proposed 5 years worth of pay increases.
Now, this is not what we had originally asked for. We all know that. But through the advocacy of our members, we have more than doubled the initial offer that was on the table.
BCPS Superintendent Dr. Darrell Williams says this one-year compensation plan is worth about $76 million.
These are wins. It's a small win, but it's a win in the right direction, and we still have more work to do.
Some of it existing budget surplus money, some American Rescue Plan education money, and the rest redirected money already in the district's budget.
We still have the work that we do every year when we develop a budget.
But much of this new compensation plan comes from one-time funding, and beyond this fiscal year, no specifics were shared on funding sources for increased teacher pay. This year, BCPS operating with a $2.3 billion budget. And in recent weeks, County Executive Johnny Olszewski tasked the district with finding money for raises in its own coffers.
Will we see any sort of increase for county taxpayers to be able to fund any of these initiatives beyond this year?
That's the beautiful thing about this package, is that it is fiscally responsible and it is sustainable while still putting tens of millions of dollars in the pockets of our hardworking educators.
Meanwhile, the teachers union says advocacy for educators will continue.
Because our members stood up, showed up, wore their red, wrote their letters. That is a win for them, but that we are not finished.
So yes, this compensation package is a win for teachers and staff right now this year, but details about those retention bonuses, when they'll come and how much they'll be for, have not been shared. Reporting live, Amy Simpson, Fox 45 News.
Amy, thank you. A manhunt underway in Washington, D.C. for a man suspected of killing a Baltimore father. The latest on how this search is intensifying.
Could hiring civilians be the key to getting officers back on the street? A possible solution to police staffing shortages.
Crime and chaos as a campaign issue. I'm Christine Frizell with a look at whether this tried and true strategy for Republicans will work this time around.
And our latest weather maker, Hurricane Ian, moving toward Florida and eventually impacting us as remnants with potentially some rain and wind over the weekend. I'm going to let you know when it gets there. We're going to time it out hour by hour. Coming up in my Weather Authority forecast.
We're 6 weeks away from the midterm elections, so what issues will voters care most about? Sinclair national correspondent Christine Frizzell takes a closer look at how crime may sway voters.
It's just the latest snapshot of chaos and crime. This time, the looting of a Philadelphia area Wawa, where police say about 100 juveniles caused thousands of dollars in damage at a time murders and other violent crimes are increasing around the city. The liberal district attorney there blamed in part for progressive policies critics say keep criminals on the streets, a conclusion on which Republicans are capitalizing and campaigning.
A nation that's safe, where communities are protected by the police and criminals are prosecuted.
In swing states especially, ads like this popping up.
Violent crime is rising, homicides up over 200%. Jamie McLeod Skinner would make it worse.
Campaigning on crime, not a new strategy for Republicans, who credit this 1988 campaign ad with helping to sink Democratic candidate Michael Dukakis's candidacy, tying him to the convicted murderer, Willie Horton.
He allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison.
So will the strategy work this time?
Politics are all about perception. If people perceive the world around them as getting worse, then they will want to throw out the party that's in.
Still, political science professor Todd Belt says crime can cut both ways. The current face of the Republican Party, former President Donald Trump, himself under multiple criminal investigations, as some fellow Republicans have called for the defunding of the nation's top law enforcement agency. The party in general often accused of giving a pass to rioters who attacked police at the Capitol on January 6th.
Democrats are going to say that this it's less about, the daily life of crime on the streets and more about the health of our democracy and whether or not we're going to have one going forward.
Democrats also staying focused on an issue they believe will drive voter turnout, and that is the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision overturning Roe versus Wade. Each party now preparing its closing arguments with 6 weeks to go. In Washington, I'm Christine Frizzell.
Well, we are continuing to track Hurricane Ian tonight as it barrels toward Tampa, Florida. Ian is now a Category 3 storm. The hurricane is hundreds of miles wide and will bring sustained winds of over 115 miles per hour when it hits Florida. This is a live look now at Mallory Square. Actually, this is the radar. And even though Ian won't hit the area directly, you can see there's already some intense wind and rain. The hurricane made its first landfall in Cuba early this morning. Those intense winds and storm surges flooding streets and destroying buildings. Officials in Florida have issued evacuation orders, and they are bracing for the worst.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I was really worried about a college friend who's in St. Pete. She's in Hillsborough County. I said, what are you going to do? Her name is B. Jackson. We're not related, but we're good friends. I said, what are you going to do? She said she's leaving.
Yeah, get out.
And I was so glad. I was worried about her.
That's the time to get inland and get away from the surge and, of course, the main impacts that we're going to be seeing out of Ian. Of course, earlier this morning, crossing the western side, as we mentioned, of Cuba, and it's been providing all kinds of tornado reports during the day today in portions of southern Florida, and will continue, I'm sure, to produce more. Right now, winds at 120 miles an hour. Looks like it could become a 130-mile-an-hour hurricane by early tomorrow and tomorrow noontime. But take a look at what happens as it continues to make that push a little bit closer to just south of Tampa. Now, it looks like it's going to be somewhere around Bradenton. We'll say actually between about Bradenton and Fort Myers, somewhere in the Sarasota area. Now it looks like it may not lose quite as much gusto, may lose a couple miles an hour on its winds, but it still could be a 3 or 4 as it makes its eventual landfall south of Tampa, which is, at least on this track, a little better situation for Tampa since it is a little farther south. So that would reduce some of the storm surges there. Then quick weakening as it moves over Florida and then eventually into the southeastern United States. And that's when we could see some remnant impacts around here end of Sunday on into Monday and maybe even bleeding into Tuesday as well. All the computer models, again, just south and east of Tampa right now. So it looks like that's what is going to be kind of the eventual landfall track sometime later on Wednesday into Wednesday night. And then kind of stalls out somewhere right around Charlotte and eventually gets gradually dragged off to the east. And that's when, again, we'll see some of our rain. Notice some of these reds, these highly favorable conditions following the storm up until generally its landfall. So now it does not look like as much of a weakening trend as it kind of remains farther away from those unfavorable conditions over the central and northeastern portion of the Gulf of Mexico. And then it makes a quick turn and heads its way up into the Carolinas. Storm surge potential could be life-threatening here around Cape Coral, all the way up to just south of Tampa, 9+ feet of surge. Tampa Bay looking at about 4 to 7 feet of surge, and that could mean life-threatening flooding occurring over portions of Fort Myers and points north just south of Tampa. And then huge rain, I mean up to 3 feet of rain. Now, that will move northbound and diminish as it continues inland, but we could see 1 to maybe 2, even 3 inches of rain down the ocean way. Could even see multiple inches of rain. And then the winds, some Category 3 winds up to about Tampa, perhaps. And then notice the greens and the blues end of the weekend into early next week here. 15 to maybe 35-mile-an-hour winds, potentially later Sunday, Monday into early Tuesday. Now, the rain looks like it waits until Saturday afternoon to get here. Then Sunday, on and off heavy rain, perhaps. And then Monday as well, some showers. The gusts really do pick up on the winds at that point. And then it looks like the remnants begin to move away on Tuesday. 71 right now, winds out of the west-southwest at 10. Very dry, beautiful day. And again, we are tracking Ian as it makes the move towards the Florida coastline, all lit up with plenty of warnings there around here. A couple of sprinkles trying to move in from Pennsylvania. I don't think much of them make it. It's just a few patchy clouds. Temperatures by tonight getting down into the upper 40s, up to near 70 tomorrow. Dry days Thursday, Friday. Again, later Saturday, rain approaches. Ravens game could be wet and windy, and that continues into Monday and early Tuesday as well.
Jonathan, thank you. Testing not only for COVID, but for the flu as well will be critical for public health this winter. The latest efforts to prevent a possible twindemic. Could hiring civilians help keep more officers on the street? Why some are skeptical about a possible solution to police staffing shortages. As cities across the country continue to struggle with understaffed police departments, Patrice Sanders talks with a former police chief about a new approach some cities are trying out.
New Orleans is the murder capital of the country, with more murders there per month than anywhere else. The police department desperate to turn their rising homicide rate around, even as they're facing an officer shortage. They're now hiring civilians for police jobs. They're looking to hire intake specialists who will monitor the phones to relieve the administrative police. They're also hiring civilians who will go out to calls that don't necessarily require police, like loose animals, medical calls, auto accidents on private property. Some will even be trained in detective work to collect evidence at some scenes. Former police chief in Martinsburg, West Virginia, Maury Richards, doesn't think it will help.
Well, unfortunately, I think it will make very little difference because it doesn't address the fundamental problems that New Orleans has, which is very similar to Baltimore. Both cities have mayors and state's attorneys who really protect criminals over victims and believe that replacing cops with social workers is going to work. And both those things are really recipes for more crime and less police.
New Orleans' plan would put at least 75 police officers back on the streets, just a dent in the 150 officers that left the job last year alone. Patrice Sanders, Fox 45 News.
Officers say he fired shots at them, and tonight they still haven't found him. The latest in the search in D.C. for a suspect in the murder of a young Baltimore father. A candidate for governor fighting for a change that could make the election process go faster. The fight over early ballot counting.
Happening right now, a manhunt in Washington, D.C. for a fugitive featured on Maryland's Most Wanted in the shooting death of a Baltimore father. Capitol Police have surrounded part of the Capitol View neighborhood where Avery Miller was spotted. Now, police believe Miller shot and killed the 25-year-old Baltimore man in early August.
We're going to get straight to Alexa Ashwell with the latest on the search. Alexa?
Yeah, Kai, Mary, police say Avery Miller fired at officers and then ran off, triggering this hours-long search that police tell me is still happening right now at this hour. As the search continues, more questions are emerging after records show this man was already wanted by police at the time of Wolf's murder. Avery Miller, the man wanted for the murder of Baltimore father Aryeh Wolf and featured on Maryland's Most Wanted, spotted in Northeast D.C. A woman leading officers to his location. Then police say Miller opening fire on officers as they approached him.
That subject then produced a firearm, discharged several rounds in the direction of our officers.
No one was hurt, but Miller ran off. Police in D.C. setting up a perimeter that spanned several blocks in the Capitol View neighborhood.
It's unknown if he's still armed. He was armed at the time he encountered our officers. We know that he is affiliated with this neighborhood, but it's not clear why he was over here.
The search happening about a mile from where Miller is accused of fatally shooting 25-year-old Aryeh Wolf as he was installing solar panels on rooftops of buildings in Southeast D.C. August 10th. Wolf, a husband and father, was well known in the Jewish community here in Baltimore. Investigators not yet pinpointing a motive, but shortly after the killing, police identifying Miller, they say, through surveillance and witness statements.
This person is armed and dangerous, and we need to get him off the streets.
Court records raising new questions and concerns. Online documents show Miller was already wanted by police at the time of Wolf's murder. Records show a warrant was issued for his arrest back in 2018 for about a dozen theft charges. It went unserved for more than 3.5 years. A judge then granting Miller bail, and Miller later failing to show up to court. That prompting a new warrant for his arrest in May of this year. It was never served. Wolf was shot and killed about 2 months later. Local attorney Kirk Nachman weighing in.
It raises a lot of questions. The local law enforcement agencies are supposed to be out serving warrants, and a lot of times they place priority on what types of crimes for which they are serving the warrants.
Now, I reached out to law enforcement agencies in D.C. and asked which agency was tasked with serving the warrants for Miller and why they went unserved for so long. I haven't heard back. As for the search for Miller, I'm told it's ongoing. Miller remains on the loose. Alexa Ashwell, Fox 45 News.
In Vote 2022 coverage now, Republican gubernatorial candidate Dan Cox is challenging a recent decision to allow mail-in and absentee ballots to be counted early. Last week, a judge decided ballot counting can begin as early as October 1st in order to expedite the process and prevent delays in calling races after Election Day. Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost joins us live with the latest efforts. Mackenzie?
Yeah, Mary, so we know that this appeal from Dan Cox and his attorney came after a judge in Montgomery County ruled last week that these mail-in ballots could be counted as early as October 1st. Now, this effort and request to the court system came from the Maryland State Board of Elections after we saw that massive influx of mail-in ballots during the primary election season. They say that people need more time to canvass these ballots to ensure that the results are not delayed even farther than what we saw during the primary. Now, this appeal from the Cox campaign is just the latest and very similar to the rhetoric we've been seeing from this campaign, saying that the current laws on the books need to be followed. And right now, according to the law on the books right now, that means that those mail-in ballots would not be able to be counted until 2 days after Election Day. Now, we spoke with John Deedy, a political analyst, earlier today, and he says that this latest move from Cox and his team is just another example of how he is following a playbook from former President Donald Trump, which could mean that he could have a tough road ahead of him in the general election.
By counting the ballots immediately, you close off the conspiracy theories election night. It makes it more difficult for him. He may not accept his loss. I doubt he will concede graciously, but it just closes another door on him. Now, he needs to move on from this and start figuring out how he's going to bring in other voters. But the problem is all of his actions show the complete opposite.
Democrats were quick to criticize this move today, including from the campaign of Wes Moore, the Democrat running for governor against Dan Cox. In a statement, their spokesperson telling me that this appeal from Cox and his team is an attempted assault on the fair election process. Let me read you more of this statement. They say, quote, "This kind of behavior is an attack on democracy and should not be allowed anywhere near the governor's office. We've said it before, Dan Cox just isn't too into democracy." Now, this afternoon, the court system did ask for more information from the Cox team, especially given this time sensitivity that we're facing coming right up to that October 1 deadline for those ballots to possibly start to be open. The courts say they need more information from Cox. We'll have to wait and see what happens. Live in Baltimore, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
We're looking at another interest rate hike. Federal Reserve officials say they are trying to tweak the economy, boosting the interest rate to get inflation down and unemployment numbers up. Experts believe the Fed's short-term rate will have to stay higher for longer than experts planned. Now, Fed Reserve leaders say they are trying to balance their goal of bringing down inflation while avoiding a recession. With rates on the rise and inflation continuing to hurt Americans' checkbooks, it's a really difficult time to manage your finances. Fox 45's Tom Rogers speaks with an expert about what you can do to stay financially stable.
Interest rates continue to rise as the Federal Reserve is trying to stop the inflation. But for most Americans who have borrowed money, the financial impact may get worse. Is cash-only budget the way to go? Financial planner and advisor Dan White, founder of Daniel A. White & Associates, says getting rid of credit card debt by using cash to pay for items will keep you better on your budget.
You know, nobody would ever think about going into a store and saying, I want to pay 20% more than what you're asking. But if you can't pay that credit card off when it comes in, that's essentially what you're doing. You're paying 20% more. So you want to be using cash as often as possible so you don't have to pay those credit card interest rates. Again, I've always said to people, if you can't pay it off in 30 days, then you couldn't afford to buy what you just bought.
Yeah, great advice. White says having a set aside cash amount for your holiday spending and not even bringing credit cards with you when you go shopping will help you stay on budget. Now, when the cash runs out, you're finished buying. Tom Rogers, Fox 45 News.
Well, the U.S. is not the only country struggling through an economic crisis. Countries around the world are suffering largely because of the war in Ukraine. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is projecting global growth at 3% this year before slowing to just 2.2% in 2023. Those numbers are significantly below the predictions before the war began.
Energy and food markets have been severely disrupted and confidence declined sharply. Inflation surged and global economic growth slowed down. The world is paying a very heavy price for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine.
Is projected to recede gradually through 2023 in most countries as tighter monetary policies take effect and global growth slows.
Well, the longer the war in Ukraine goes on, the worse its global economic impact will be, according to experts. While Ukraine has retaken some of the territory it lost, Russia is escalating the conflict, calling in military reserves. In fact, more than 300,000 soldiers for the first time since World War II. Russian President Vladimir Putin is also threatening to use nuclear weapons. This morning, we spoke to the director of global studies at Loyola University, Maryland, who says that's a threat the world can't take lightly.
This is an increasingly desperate situation for Putin, which is both good and bad. It's good because it means that the strategy that we've been employing to exert leverage and pressure on Russia is working. But it's bad because, of course, desperate leaders are prone to doing increasingly desperate things.
Schneider also says Putin's decision to draft more soldiers into the military could cause serious issues with the Russian people.
By calling up the reservists, by increasing the conscription amongst able-bodied men and women in Russia, he's bringing the war home to people who didn't want the war to come to them. And so there's sort of this mutual consent between the Russian people and Putin that they are okay with accepting dictatorship as long as they are largely left out of it. And so by increasing conscription, he's bringing the war to them.
Well, since Putin announced he was bolstering the number of soldiers, there have been protests, flights out of Russia have been filled, and the number of Google searches of questions like how to leave Russia have skyrocketed. All that indicating people would rather flee the country than fight in Ukraine. Experts say flu season could be worse than COVID-19 this fall and winter, but the two together could be the perfect sickness storm.
I don't like the sound of that.
I don't either.
At all.
No.
The new COVID strains paired with this year's flu already causing issues around the world. Medical reporter Liz Bonus explains why.
Hey there, everybody. If you're already feeling lousy, welcome to what may be the start of what healthcare providers refer to as the twin-demic. It is the combo of isolated flu cases mixed with the current variants of COVID-19 already going around. No matter what you've heard about COVID being over,
unfortunately, COVID is not over.
But already places such as Hong Kong are warning the flu could be just as bad this season or worse.
We do have concerns that this will be a tougher year, which may mean that we'll see more hospitalizations from influenza.
Dr. Brian Strader says the collision of little immunity from the flu due to 2 years of past pandemic protection and new strains now rising of COVID-19, such as BA 4.6 and BF7, are the perfect sickness storm for cooler months.
The way that flu, the virus shifts and drifts over time, you have light years and you have more severe years where the virus itself is more virulent.
Dr. Strader suggests you give yourself a boost against both. This year's flu vaccine is the best defense against current strains, and even if you've had COVID-19,
I was actually in bed for about 5 days. I think the worst part of it was just being isolated from the family at the time when I had it.
you get the new bivalent booster. It's also suggested you invest in a few home test kits for COVID-19 if you don't have any on hand. The symptoms of both the flu and COVID-19 are so similar right now: cough, shortness of breath, body aches, fever. There's really only one distinct difference: timing. Flu tends to hit suddenly like a truck within 1 to 4 days after exposure. COVID generally takes about 5. We, of course, won't know how well either of these vaccines work in the real world, likely, until we hit the height of this flu and COVID-19 season. That can be anywhere from October to March. I'm medical reporter Liz Bonus. Now back to you.
Hurricane Ian barreling towards Florida. The latest on the efforts to minimize the damage it could cause.
And Ian is pushing toward Florida, and eventually, after devastating portions of the Gulf Coast, could end up in our backyard. I'm going to let you know how much of Ian's going to be left as it makes a move up towards the mid-Atlantic this weekend. My Weather Authority forecast.
Multiple counties, including coastal areas near Tampa Bay, Florida, are bracing for Hurricane Ian. It is expected to be the strongest storm to hit that area in decades. Stephen Quinn from our Sinclair sister station in Birmingham, Alabama, is in Florida tonight with the latest.
Whether they're headed north or south, everyone along I-75 is preparing to make their final moves before Ian makes landfall. Most are headed north. This is the last day those along the peninsula can evacuate. Caravans of emergency personnel, though, are traveling south should they be needed. And so is this man, Hector Guzman. The Uber driver has been ferrying people to safety from Clearwater for a day now. He plans to go back later today to ride the storm out.
My kids wanted me to go back to where they live in Georgia and South Carolina.
What made you decide to stay?
Because I just want to stay, that's all. Watching the house.
And as for the people he's bringing here?
I appreciate what they bringing them to that far. Then I feel good. I can help somebody.
And for those who do stay in places like Clearwater, Florida, the question is not if, but when the power goes out. And when it does, crews like this are ready, descending from places all over the country as far away as Michigan, but also in places like Sarasota in the path of the hurricane. They're ready to move out as soon as the storm passes, trying to get lights back on in Florida. In Ocala, Stephen Quinn reporting.
Well, remnants of that storm will likely impact Maryland later this week. Governor Hogan has said emergency crews are ready to respond if flooding enters the state. Here's Chief Meteorologist Jonathan Myers with more.
Yeah, and those very familiar scenes for me. I worked in New Orleans prior to coming here to Baltimore, worked there for 6 years, and I remember several hurricanes, watching all those power trucks sitting at the gas stations and folks lining up and loading up. Man, certainly a scary situation there for western Florida right now, Gulf Coast of Florida. We got a Category 3 hurricane, a major hurricane on our hands. Winds at 120 miles an hour currently. You can see the eye of the storm, the very deep reds right around the center. That's some intense thunderstorm activity. This could become a Category 4 as it continues to rapidly strengthen by about midday on Wednesday and could potentially hit the coast as a Category 3 or 4 later Wednesday into very early Thursday, which means winds at least about 100, 125 miles an hour, and then a quick weakening trend. Now, I do want you to notice the line track here, although you have to kind of pay attention to the cone of uncertainty, if you will, or the cone of error, but the line track does go south of Tampa. Worst case scenario with the winds would be north of Tampa. That would drive water into Tampa Bay. This would not as much. Nonetheless, still could be a devastating system here for western and southern Florida, eventually making the move by this weekend as a remnant low into portions of the western and southern mid-Atlantic. There are your computer models, all of them pretty much clustering just south and east of Tampa now, eventually moving up the peninsula of Florida, maybe clipping off into the Atlantic for a very short time. And then this kind of bird's nest here, if you will, of all the computer models. What that means right here around Charlotte is kind of a stall and then a gradual movement off to the east. And that's when we potentially could see some effects around here. Notice the red, that's highly favorable conditions for rapid strengthening and development. And that basically follows the storm all the way into tomorrow night when it makes that landfall somewhere right around Bradenton, Florida, or just north of Fort Myers, it appears now. And then it eventually moves inland, and that's when, again, we see our effects later in the weekend, early next week. Won't be anything like what they're going to see down south here across Florida, but we could see some pretty good rains and also maybe a little bit of breezier, blustery conditions coming. Look at some of these life-threatening storm surges here in this bright red. That could be 9+ feet above ground level. So that means over 9 feet of surge coming into houses, coming into beaches, coming into roads, coming into communities. Thankfully, again, it'll be south of Tampa, which is very highly populated. But nonetheless, that's going to go all the way down south into the Everglades of Florida with some devastating coastal flooding. And look at this rainfall potential. I mean, we could be talking up to nearly 3 feet of rain. Remember Harvey back around Houston, southeastern Texas, up to about 40 inches of rain back in 2017, and some of the images coming out of there. That could happen here around Tampa in terms of rainfall next couple of days. Now, as it moves north, it's going to lose moisture, but still 1-2 inches of rain maybe. Lower Delmarva could have some greater amounts, maybe 3-4 inches of rain. Of course, winds will diminish as it moves inland as well, but still, after just absolutely slamming Florida, could have here this bluish green up to about 20 to 30, maybe even 40-mile-an-hour winds. Now, the rain really waits, I think, until later on Saturday to get here, and then Sunday potentially could be a washout. Winds pick up through the day on Sunday, and it's a blustery, showery day on Monday into early Tuesday before this begins to pull out of here and things do improve. Right now, Mile 1 Townsend Camp, 71 degrees, winds out of the west-southwest at 10 miles an hour, nice and dry. And we take a look down in Florida. Of course, we're tracking Ian as it moves northbound. System off to our north right now, and I think that's just some patchy clouds for us and chill for tonight. 48, 70 for tomorrow, upper 60s Thursday, Friday. Ravens game could be wet and windy.
All right, Jonathan, thank you. Coming up at 6 o'clock, Hurricane Ian bears down on Florida, as Jonathan just mentioned. How does it compare to other major storms to hit that state? And how does climate change play a factor in storm surge? And the Ravens, not the home favorite for Sunday's meeting with the Bills, what Coach John Harbaugh sees as Buffalo's most dangerous threat. That's ahead on Sports Unlimited.
Maryland won't talk in moral victories, only that the program took a big step forward with its one-score loss at number 4 Michigan over the weekend. A game-starting quarterback Talia Tagovailoa didn't finish after taking multiple shots. He says he's good 100%, but sporting a knee brace at practice today. Head coach Michael Locksley won't tip his hand, calling his QB decision for Saturday at home with Michigan State a game-time decision, along with receiver Rakim Jarrett. Leah is 25th in college football for passing yards this season, just over 1,000 through 4 games.
Both those guys will be game day decisions. I'm going to stay right in line with every other coach in the Big Ten who doesn't disclose their injuries, and just we'll see what happens on game day. But I think they both are progressing nicely, but we'll have to make that decision as we move closer to the end of the week and see how they've prepared.
The biggest test for the Ravens so far this season, perhaps the entire season, is when they get back to work tomorrow on the practice field for Week 4 against the Bills. Buffalo is the road favorite against the Ravens, minus a field goal. Shows the lack of confidence maybe in the Ravens defense or the overconfidence in the Bills. The Dolphins proved on Sunday the Bills can lose, but that Buffalo offense led by Josh Allen seems unstoppable. Yet the same should be said for the Ravens led by Lamar Jackson.
They do run a lot of similar plays, you know. They run different plays, too. They've got their own style. Very physical offensive line. You know, playmaking receivers, especially number 14 and number 88, but and number 6. You know, they got some downhill elusive backs, hard runners. So that's just starting looking at them, you know. Some of it being TV scouting even. You know, you watch them on TV, you get a feel for them, too. But big challenge.
14's a Terp. Now the Ravens added another veteran pass rusher to their practice squad in the O's postseason push. That's tonight when Sports Unlimited continues.
All right, Morgan, thank you. New tonight at 6 o'clock on Fox 45. The Orioles are in the middle of a surprise playoff run. How a state-of-the-art pitching lab could help them down the stretch. And 3D printing homes could be in the future in California. How this innovation could keep thousands of people safe from wildfire damage.
New details in a deadly shooting just blocks from Morgan State University this summer. Students weighing in as we're learning more about the suspect. A polarizing proposal could bring term limits to Baltimore City, why those in favor think the change couldn't come at a better time. And Hurricane Ian closes in on Florida. A live look at Key West as Chief Meteorologist Jonathan Meyer standing by to track its latest movements.
Live from WBFF in Baltimore, this is Fox 45 News at 6.
And good evening, everybody. I'm Mary Bubala. We begin tonight with breaking news as we are learning more about the suspect in a deadly shooting near Morgan State University at the end of August. Keith Daniels is following the story for us tonight. Keith, what's the latest?
Well, Mary, as you know, that shooting happened here behind me. Now, police arrested 21-year-old Chase Wilson yesterday, and tonight he faces several charges, including first-degree murder. Now, police say Wilson, seen here, shot Julian Frew after an argument August 31st. It happened at the Marble Hall Garden Apartments, which houses some Morgan State students. Frew was a contracted security guard with Allied working for the university. He was on duty when he was shot. According to charging documents, the murder was caught on camera. The video shows what appears to be Wilson approaching Frew after a cell phone conversation. The suspect says something to Frew, shoots him, and runs off. Charging documents also reveal sandwich bags full of suspected marijuana were found in Frew's book bag, as well as packaging material and a digital scale. Now the arrest.
I remember I was really scared because I heard the gunshot in my apartment. And I mean, just hearing that the arrest has been done, I guess it just makes me feel comfortable enough to be able to go out now. Like, I've been going out since it happened, but at the back of my mind, I've just been thinking, how safe am I?
Well, we did reach out to the university for comment or a statement. Just hearing back from them, the only thing they say at this hour is that they do confirm the suspect is a student. Meantime, Wilson faces life in prison if convicted. We're live tonight. Keith Daniels, Fox 45 News.
Keith, thank you. Also breaking tonight, Fox 45 News has obtained a report from the Maryland Attorney General's office about conditions at the Baltimore Juvenile Justice Center. The report found at least 2 people were hospitalized after being attacked by other inmates. The center's population is also up nearly 75% this summer, putting a strain on staffing. The report states the children often had their classes cut short, citing a teacher shortage. The report also claims hygiene products are poorly rationed, and there have been several instances of drug smuggling. Jeff Abel is following the story for us. He'll have more tonight on the news at 10.
Well, Johns Hopkins University is moving forward with plans for a private police force, but some students and community members apparently don't want it. Coppin State University, Morgan State University, Loyola University, Maryland, and the University of Maryland all have their own police units. Now, much of the concern stems from Hopkins' location in the city and questioning whether officers will be held to the same standards as Baltimore City police officers. Johns Hopkins is trying to ease those concerns with a memorandum of understanding.
What Hopkins is trying to do is soothe people by basically saying, look, it's not going to be what you think it is.
It should really make everyone comfortable who has a legitimate concern about the accountability piece.
Well, the university is agreeing to a number of measures, like complying with the consent decree that Baltimore City Police Department is under, wearing body cameras, and also handling only minor crimes.
We are exactly 6 weeks away from Election Day, and a new proposal to limit terms is gaining traction at a local level. Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost explains.
It's called Question K, and supporters of implementing term limits in Baltimore say that given the soaring crime rates, educational concerns, and growing mistrust in government, putting caps on how long elected leaders could serve could help the city. In front of City Hall,
why am I part of it? Because I support this man, and I want term limits.
A group of local activists and leaders all calling on voters to make a change.
I believe that this is the time for OK for Question K.
On the ballot, you'll see a slew of questions, including Question K. It sets out to only limit city council members, the council president, the mayor, and comptroller to 2 four-year terms.
This is a modest concept that makes sense for Baltimore City.
And it would begin in 2024.
We need fresh new ideas. We need bold new ideas.
Giovanni Patterson, former GOP candidate for city council president, now the chairman of the People for Elected Accountability and Civic Engagement. That's the group backing the efforts.
We're watching our population decline, our murder rate continues to rise, and our public school students continue to fall further behind. We want to create a healthy local government where our elected leaders are not content to remain in office for many years and follow the same old status quo.
Similar plans have been tried before. Bills in the council in 2015 and 2018 failed. In this 2018 Baltimore Sun article, then City Councilman Brennan Scott is quoted saying, "I support the bill," though he did raise some financial concerns. But with Baltimore in the midst of a crime crisis that's gripped the city for almost a decade, and an education system with plummeting graduation rates and students slipping in class,
I have seen city government over the last 50 years. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Former independent mayoral candidate and business owner Bob Wallace says term limits could help leaders stay focused on creating change.
A commitment to solve problems. And I believe, Mackenzie, that 8 years is enough time to have an impact.
Several large cities like New York, Los Angeles, Houston, and Dallas all have some term limits in place. Baltimore ballot questions historically have seen success.
I think that this is a measure that I could see passing very easily.
And with the problems facing City Hall, political analyst John Dede says voters could see this as a chance to change Baltimore.
Based on the record of a lot of Baltimore City leaders over the last 20 years and the way things have gone, people may look at term limits as this is the best solution.
The ballot proposal would not prevent someone from running for other offices if they get termed out. The group says they're working to kick off a public awareness campaign to make sure voters know exactly what they will be seeing on their ballot come November. Outside City Hall, Mackenzie Frost, Fox 45 News.
And we do need to disclose that Sinclair's executive chairman, David Smith, did financially support the petition drive to get the issue of term limits on the ballot. Sinclair is the parent company of FOX45. Well, here are a few dates to know leading up to the election. The deadline to register to vote is October 18th. The last day to request a mail-in ballot is November 1st. Early voting runs from October 27th to November 3rd. And Election Day itself is on November 8th. And here's our look at today's top trending stories. Number one, a touching tribute from the Red Sox during last night's game against the Orioles. The Red Sox honored Paul Buttram, Kelsey Sadler, and Kenny Lacayo, the three Baltimore City firefighters killed in a vacant row home fire back in January. All three names and pictures were shown on the scoreboard. Lieutenant Buttram's page noted he was a lifelong Red Sox fan. Number two, a U.S. Navy nuclear engineer from Annapolis and his wife are pleading guilty to conspiracy charges for their alleged involvement in an espionage plot. Prosecutors say Jonathan Toby abused his top secret government access, sending a package of Navy documents to a foreign government. His wife, Diana, has been accused of acting as a lookout. A plea deal was rejected by a judge last month, who at the time said a 13-year sentence for Jonathan was too lenient. Number three, a massive walkout as hundreds of Virginia students are protesting Governor Glenn Youngkin's latest transgender education policy. The state's current policy allows students to choose their bathrooms, locker rooms, and what sports they play based on gender identity, not biological sex. This can all be done without parental permission. Youngkin's policy is looking to change that. He says parents should have a more active role in the decision, but students say this new ruling would treat them more like their parents' property and less like independent people.
Whether it's parents who just outright don't understand, they don't necessarily reject the student, but they don't understand, to those who are actively abusive to their queer kids. Every single kind of that family exists in Virginia.
You either think that parents should be engaged in this decision, which is what I firmly believe, it's what Virginia voters expressed loudly last year, or you think that parents should be excluded from this decision.
Well, Monday was the first day of a 30-day public comment period. The new policies are slated to take effect by the end of October. Well, thousands of Baltimore County teachers are about to see a pay bump, but how is the county going to fund it? Amy Simpson takes us through the plan.
We know the county executive and BCPS leadership have clashed over these talks in recent weeks, not about whether or not these teachers and staff members deserve the raises, but instead where the money would come from. In a rare occasion today, Baltimore County government and school leadership all standing shoulder to shoulder, announcing plans to raise pay for thousands of teachers and staff across Baltimore County public schools.
Working together, we have reached an agreement on a substantial compensation package for
BCPS employees for the 2022-2023 school year.
The agreement includes a 3% cost of living increase, retroactive to July 1st, a mid-year step increase for all employees, retroactive to the start of the fiscal year, retention bonuses for all staff, and additional bonuses for employees with more than 30 years of service.
Give our staff the compensation they truly deserve, and we would love to give more.
A competitive compensation package for BCPS employees.
While the teachers union is more blunt, as the original plan on the table proposed 5 years worth of pay increases.
Now, this is not what we had originally asked for. We all know that. But through the advocacy of our members, we have more than doubled the initial offer that was on the table.
BCPS Superintendent Dr. Darrell Williams says this one-year compensation plan is worth about $76 million.
These are wins. It's a small win, but it's a win in the right direction, and we still have more work to do.
Some of it existing budget surplus money, some American Rescue Plan education money, and the rest redirected money already in the district's budget.
We still have the work that we do every year when we develop a budget.
But much of this new compensation plan comes from one-time funding, and beyond this fiscal year, no specifics were shared on funding sources for increased teacher pay. This year, BCPS operating with a $2.3 billion budget. And in recent weeks, County Executive Johnny Olszewski tasked the district with finding money for raises in its own coffers.
Will we see any sort of increase for county taxpayers to be able to fund any of these initiatives beyond this year?
That's the beautiful thing about this package, is that it is fiscally responsible and it is sustainable while still putting tens of millions of dollars in the pockets of our hardworking educators.
Meanwhile, the teachers union says advocacy for educators will continue.
Because our members stood up, showed up, wore their red, wrote their letters, that it's a win for them, but that we are not finished.
And while today's news is a positive step for teachers right now, details about those retention bonuses, when they'll come, and how much they'll be for were not shared. Amy Simpson, Fox 45 News.
Hurricane patterns in the Atlantic are changing. I'm Kayla Gaskins, and we will hear from some scientists straight ahead.
And a blockbuster storm, Ian, heading toward south of Tampa, Florida, Fort Myers area. As a major hurricane, we could even see some impacts as remnants move our way this weekend. I'm going to let you know what to expect hour by hour, day by day in my Weather Authority forecast.
Hurricane Ian is closing in on South Florida, expected to drop heavy rainfall on Tampa Bay and the surrounding area. NOAA scientists say hurricanes are getting stronger year over year in Florida. Kayla Gaskins explains how climate change could be playing a role.
The NOAA scientist I spoke with says warmer ocean water plays a role, but hurricane data is tricky, making it hard to prove exact causes in the changes we're seeing. Atlantic hurricane patterns are changing.
Greater numbers of major hurricanes, greater intensities, more rapid intensification, all these changes since 1980.
Many pointing fingers at greenhouse gases and climate change, but Ted Knutson, a senior climate scientist at NOAA, says it's not that simple.
The question is, which of these changes are actually being driven by increasing greenhouse gases, and to what degree are these changes being driven by something else?
With the data we currently have, Knutson concludes it is premature to conclude with high confidence that human-caused increasing greenhouse gases have had a detectable impact on past Atlantic Basin hurricane activity. University of Albany Associate Professor Kristen Corbisario.
The difficulty with looking at trends in hurricane data is that we go past the late 70s. It gets a little bit difficult in terms of observations.
Knutson and Corbisario say climate does impact higher seas, which causes worse storm surge.
We do have the sea level rise going on, so whatever hurricanes are coming in on this higher background sea level.
Some storms also show an increase in rainfall.
It's really, really hard to pin climate change on any one storm. You can't say that any one storm was caused by climate change or impacted by it. But what we can say is that things we know, that the climate is getting warmer, storms moving slower, more rainfall, higher storm surge.
Hurricanes are increasingly costly, according to NOAA, thanks to humans and the desire to flock to the coastline, building up infrastructure, homes, roads, and buildings at risk of damage whenever the next storm rolls through. Tampa Bay, currently in the path of Hurricane Ian, has not had a direct hit since 1921. There's been a lot of construction in the last 100 years, causing some to worry about the amount of damage Ian may do. I'm Kayla Gaskins reporting.
Well, let's take a live look at Key West. As you can see, the rain and heavy wind already starting to hit the coastline. Jonathan, you're tracking Ian's movement. Where is it now, and where does it look like it's going to next?
Well, right now, Mary, it is over the open Gulf, and this is just off to the north and northwest of Cuba, and really just almost due west of Key West right now. So that's why they're getting all the wind and rain. Now, it is a Category 3, eventually strengthening to a Category 4. And you might have heard there in Kayla's story that she was saying that this could be heading toward Tampa. Well, that information has been revised a little bit. It looks more so that this goes just south of Tampa. If it went to or north of Tampa with the wind flow around this, you can kind of see which way the icon is circulating, we would force lots of water up into Tampa Bay. That would have been 9+ feet of surge going into downtown portions of Tampa. So thankfully, this not likely taking that track, but nonetheless still very damaging. Bradenton all the way south to about Cape Coral. Some of these areas could be devastated now, it looks like, with 9+ feet of storm surge, especially in some of those nooks and crannies that really funnel this stuff in. Again, it looks like sometime later on tomorrow evening into tomorrow night is when we could have a direct landfall of a Category 3 or maybe even a low-end Category 4 hurricane. Remember, this right now with winds at 120 miles an hour, so just an absolutely deadly storm. Then this moves north and looks like it moves over portions of the Florida Peninsula after making that direct landfall here. A good little clustering of all the computer model tracks, so some increasing degree of certainty as to where this is going to go. Just south of Tampa, and then eventually moving over the Florida Peninsula, almost over Jacksonville. Still could be a hurricane or at least a tropical storm at that point, and then making a curve towards Charlotte, North Carolina as a remnant low. and then getting swept off to the east. Now, the bad news here is the farther south this thing heads, instead of up towards, say, the Big Bend of Florida, like it looked like this was going to go, it's going to avoid this highly unfavorable area for development, stays in this red. So that's why we expect that increase in strength all the way almost up until its landfall. And then eventually, again, it looks like this moves northbound pretty much over land over the next several days thereafter. Could put in, again, 9+ feet of storm surge in this bright red area. Could devastate some of these bayside areas south of Tampa, Bradenton southbound, Sarasota southbound. And again, look at the rain. Tampa, you could be in line for up to 3 feet of rain. That's harkening back to, if you remember, 2017 Harvey. Some of those images of the swamping of Houston, up to 40 inches of rain or so. That could happen down in central western Florida. Around here, maybe an inch or two of rain as that system comes nearby later on in the weekend, early next week. Then the winds, huge winds down in Florida. But around here, by the time it gets here, later Sunday into Monday, some winds could gust 20, maybe 35, 40 miles an hour, especially near the water. Timing the rain out, again, it moves in from the south, especially Sunday, on and off heavy rain, and that continues into Monday, finally tapering on Tuesday. Still a blustery day there on Tuesday as well, so we're going to have to watch some of the winds there. Right now, 69 after a high of 74, winds out of the west at 11 miles an hour. There is our storm making that push up toward Tampa, Florida. Dry around here, stays dry tomorrow with highs around 70 after cool lows in the upper 40s to near 50. I'm going to let you know when we're going to see our impacts out of the storm in my exclusive 10-day forecast in a couple.
Weather Window, presented by the National Weather Desk.
While Florida braces for Hurricane Ian, it's looking like winter up north. The National Weather Service office in Duluth, Minnesota tweeted this photo this morning. Just a reminder that winter is coming. But we won't leave you feeling too cold. Here are some stunning sunrise photos from Gulf State Pier along Alabama's Gulf Coast. It looks like they will not have to worry about Ian there.
Want to see your weather photos and videos on TV? Click Chime In on this station's website to share.
Exclusive 10-day forecast, 74 tomorrow after 74 today. A cool start on Thursday as we work it to 68 on Thursday afternoon. Clouds increase in advance of the remnants of Ian on Friday. Cloudy and showers developing on Saturday, 72. Ravens game could be wet and wild, at least with the current forecast, 64, occasional rain and breezy. And the remnants of Ian continue with some scattered showers Monday. Breezes pick up. Breezes stay Tuesday, 65, and it dries out end of next week.
Jonathan, thank you. Well, finally tonight, the Orioles are in a playoff push this year, and they now have a new tool to make sure the team keeps playing at a very high level. The team is unveiling its state-of-the-art pitching facility in Bel Air, which allows coaches and doctors to better track every aspect of pitching. The Orioles are teaming up with the MedStar Health to look into each pitcher's routine in the hopes of limiting injury and creating a more efficient motion.
It's an easier transition into the major leagues when your delivery's right, when we don't have to do a ton of stuff once they get here. And then for our guys here is keeping them healthy, which is a systematic way of strength and conditioning and training and using the pitching lab to do stuff like that.
The Orioles are 3.5 games out of the last AL playoff spot. They're in Boston tonight to face the Red Sox. Go O's. That's all for Fox 45 News at 6. Family Feud is up next. We'll see you back here for the news at 10 tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great night.